All right, now our veneer is on our cabinet. We have our drawer assembled. Let's go ahead and put it in the cabinet. See how it fits. Beautiful fit, it glides nicely. And now it's time for us to calculate the width and height of our drawer front and the width and height of the door. So I think we'll go over to the board and run some calculations over there. All right, now it's time to calculate the height and the width of our drawer front and door. And I think you're going to really see the power of the European 32mm system in doing this. The holes that we bored are going to make it very easy for us to calculate the drawer height and the door height. It may not seem easy at first, but after you do it a few times, you'll get very comfortable with it. You'll remember back when we were boring the holes over at the Blum MiniPress, we were very careful in setting all of that up. We made the cabinet height a certain height so that when we bored the holes that are 32mm apart, we bored them so that the top hole was the same distance from the top as the bottom hole was from the bottom. And this makes our sides interchangeable, so they're not left-handed or right-handed. It can be either a left or a right. What I've done here is I've drawn an illustration on the board of our cabinet, a cabinet section, and I'm going to sort of show you how we're going to lay this thing out. Now, our drawer front is going to be right here. Here's our door. Here's the cabinet top and bottom. Because our door and drawer front are both inset, they have to set in underneath the top, above the bottom. We're going to have a 2mm reveal at the top. We'll have a 2mm reveal between the drawer front and the door, and then we'll have another 2mm gap at the bottom. And so what I'd like to do now is show you how we're going to calculate the height. We'll do the width in a moment. It's much easier to do, but I want to focus on the height right now. So let's take a look at our cabinet side. And this again, this is another representation without the door and the drawer front drawn in, but I have drawn in the hole pattern, the boring pattern. And just to sort of recap, we bored our first hole from the bottom, 44.5mm. And then you remember all of our holes are 32mm apart. And then our top hole was also 44.5mm. Now here's the key to making this system work. We're going to break our door and drawer front on a system hole. And you could choose any one of these holes that you want. And so I'm going to choose one based on where the drawer guide is. We mounted our drawer guide right here on the fourth hole down, so I know it's here. I want to get the door as high as I can, so I'm going to break the door and the drawer front on this hole right here. So let's run some math. I guess the other thing I should point out is these two holes here are dedicated for the mounting plate for the door, and also these two holes are dedicated for the mounting plate for the door. So this is where the bottom hinge will be mounted and the top hinge will be mounted here. So let's start with the height calculation for our drawer front. Now we're going to break the drawer front on this fifth hole down. So I'm just going to draw a drawer front right here to sort of represent where it's going to be. And then our door will be right here like this. And we'll have a 2mm reveal, or a gap, between the bottom of the drawer front and the top of the door. So what we need to do is figure out what this distance is from the top of the cabinet to the center of this hole. So let's just start there. We know that it's 44.5mm from the top to the first hole. So let's just go ahead and write that down, 44.5. And then all we have to do is count the spaces between these holes, because we know they're 32mm apart. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. 4 times 32 is 128. So I'm going to add 128 here, and I'm going to add them together. And again, remember that's to the center of the hole. So now I'm at 172.5 millimeters. Now the drawer front is, as we said earlier, is going to come up and it's going to be underneath this 19 millimeter top, and we're going to have a 2 millimeter reveal right here. All right, so we know that the distance from the top of the cabinet to the center of this hole is 172.5 millimeters. So now let's deduct for the top. That's minus 19 millimeters. 5, and then 6, 5, and that's 153.5 millimeters. And then we're going to have a 2 millimeter gap here. We have a 2 millimeter gap here, but here's, this is really important to understand. Because we're splitting the drawer front and the door on this hole, we want to come up 1 millimeter for the drawer front, and then when we calculate the door, we're going to go down 1 millimeter for the door. That'll make 2 millimeters. So I'm going to right now take 2 millimeters plus 1 millimeter and subtract that off. So I'll be at, that's minus 3, so I'm at 150.5 millimeters. And then finally, we're going to be edge banding the door. We're going to be putting a wood cherry edge banding on it. So I'm going to deduct another millimeter for a piece of edge banding tape on the bottom and top of the drawer front. So I end up at 149.5 millimeters for the height of the drawer front. All right, I'm going to erase this now and we'll calculate the height of the door, but first I want to save this dimension. I'm going to put both the finished dimension, which is 150.5 millimeters, and then the actual dimension that I'm going to use when I cut the drawer front, which is 149.5. So that's the actual dimension that will cut the drawer front. When we add the edge banding tape, it'll come back to 150.5. All right, so let's calculate the height of our door. And I'm going to just draw it in here to remind us that we're going to have a 2 millimeter reveal at the bottom. And we also have a 2 millimeter reveal here, but remember we've already accounted for half of that because we deducted 1 millimeter off of the height of our drawer front. So we're just going to do a 1 millimeter deduction here. So let's do just like we did with the drawer front. Let's start at the bottom this time and we'll work our way up and figure out how tall this door should be. So let's start down here. We know that our first hole is 44.5 millimeters from the bottom, 44.5. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 spaces between our holes. We know that they're 32 millimeters apart. 12 times 32 is 384. And so I'll add that together. That's 8, 2, that's 428.5 millimeters. So from here to the center of this hole right here is 428.5 millimeters. All right, let's start deducting off the things that we have to. First of all, the bottom is 19 millimeters and then our reveal. So the first thing I'll do is deduct off 19 millimeters for the bottom. That'll get us up inside the cabinet. 5, that's 9, that's 409 millimeters, 409.5 millimeters. Now I have a 1 millimeter reveal that I need to create here and a 2 millimeter reveal down there, so I'll deduct 3 millimeters off. That's 406.5, and then just like we did with the drawer front, we're going to deduct 1 millimeter for the thickness of the edge banding, so minus 1. So I'm at 405.5 millimeters for the height of the door, and I'll write that right over here. 1.5. That's the actual dimension that we're going to cut it at, but when it's finished, it's going to finish out at 406.5. Now, it's always a good idea, once you finish doing these mathematical calculations, to reconcile your dimensions. We know that the cabinet is 601 millimeters, and so if we take 19.2 for the reveal, 406.5, 2 for the reveal, 150.5 for the height of the drawer front, 2 for the reveal, and 19 millimeters for the top, that should all add up to 601. And if it does, you're good to go. You can start cutting your cabinet parts. All right, let's calculate the width of our door and our drawer front. And I've drawn a front elevation of the cabinet. And our cabinet is 348 millimeters wide. Our drawer front is going to be inset like so. And the door is also going to be inset. Now we've already calculated the height, and now we're going to work on the width. And this is probably the easiest calculation we have to do. All we have to do is take the width, 348 millimeters. We know that our sides are 19 millimeters. And so we'll just subtract those off. So 19 and 19 is 38. So we're at 310 millimeters. And now we just have to deduct for our 2 millimeter reveals on each side. So there's 2 millimeters, that's 4 millimeters. And then remember what we did before, we took off an extra millimeter for the thickness of the edge banding. So I'm going to subtract 5 millimeters off of that width, and I end up at 305. Now, it's always a good idea to go back and actually measure your cabinet and measure that inside dimension and make sure that it's the same, because you know what plays out on paper in the theoretical world isn't always what happens in the real world. And I actually measured my cabinet, and it's 309 millimeters inside here rather than 310. So I'm just going to go ahead and subtract another millimeter off here, and I'll cut it at 304 millimeters. All right, well, we have all of our dimensions now. Let's go over to the table saw and cut our door and drawer front. We're going to cut our drawer front and door out of one piece so that the grain flows through the door into the drawer front. And it's really important when you're doing this to pay close attention to where you're cutting, because what will happen is if you trim this side of the door, trim this side of the drawer front, then the grain gets mismatched. So we want to be really careful about that. What I usually like to do is put a mark on here and show, okay, this is the door, this is the drawer front. And what I also like to do is I like to have the cathedrals going up. So here you can see the cathedrals here on in the cherry, and so I'm going to mark it probably right across here, that this is door and this is drawer front. That way I won't get confused when I'm cutting. Another thing that is I think a really good idea is to cut both pieces to width at the same time. In other words, don't make this cut first and then cut them to width, because then it's easy to flip them around. If you just leave this piece intact, cut it down to 404 millimeters in this case, or excuse me, 304 millimeters in this case, then you won't have any problem like that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and get these guys cut up. All right, we should have a nice grain match. Let me stand this up so that you can see. And we have a perfect match on our grain. I was really careful when I did this. I thought through every step to make sure that I cut it on the right side. I almost cut the drawer front on the wrong side, but because I had made these notations on here, I was able to identify which side needed to be cut. So be very careful with this operation. Okay, now we need to edge band these guys, and then we'll take them over to the Blum MiniPress, get them prepped for hinges, put them in the cabinet, and we will almost be done. All right, it's time to edge band our door and drawer front. We've already done quite a bit of edge banding and gluing of veneer, so I'm not going to go through the entire procedure with you, but I do want to make a couple of points. One is a point that I made last time, and that was keep a little bit of gap between your pieces of edge banding so that the glue doesn't stick them together and pull the wood fibers apart. And then secondly, what you want to do is to put the edge banding on the sides first and then the top. So you'll glue the two sides, you'll fix the edge banding, and then you'll come across with your piece on the top and bottom. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to hide the joint so that you don't see the end grain. When you pull this drawer out, you're not going to see the end grain of that veneer. So I'll see you after I finish getting this edge banded. All right, I've done my touch-up sanding where the edge banding meets the edge of the face of my cherry board. I wanted to show you the edge here so that if you were looking at this drawer front from the top down, it looks like the piece runs all the way across on both sides. You don't see a joint like you do on the ends. It's not as pronounced here as it would be if it were a laminate door and you had the black edge that you had to deal with. So just get in the habit, put the sides on first, then do the top and bottom. So now that this is done, it's time to do a little calculation on where we're going to bore our 35mm cup holes for our hinges, and we have some additional holes that we're going to drill in the back of the drawer front to affix it to the drawer itself. So let's go do that. All right, it's time to install our drawer front and our door. And let me start with the drawer front. What we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to bore two 20mm holes in the back of the drawer front. Now this is just a practice piece that I cut out so that you could see this. After we get the holes bored, we're going to place these pins into the holes. We will place the drawer front over the drawer, get it exactly where we want it, and then tap it. And it'll leave two impressions right here. And then we can drill that out with a drill bit. And then we take these out and we're going to put these drawer adjusters in. And we'll just pound them in with a hammer, two of them. And the screw will actually screw into this little fitting right here. And actually they give you adjustment. This little piece in here moves back and forth, and I'll show you that in greater detail in just a moment. All right, now I'm going to adjust the Blum MiniPress to bore the 20mm hole in the backs of the drawer fronts. It's set up right now with the 7-spindle head, so I'm going to have to take that off. Loosen these screws up. Two little thumb screws in the back here, which I'll remove, set it aside, and put in the 20mm bit. One safety tip here is you want to make sure that the power is off when you're doing this. Now, the other thing I have to do is take off this reducer on the back. If you remember, we put that on for the 7-spindle head because it sets lower on the press, and so we don't want it to drill through the table. But now we've moved it up, and we're going to take this off. Next, I'm going to set the depth of the fence, and I'm going to set it back more than we usually do. I'm actually going to set it at 50 millimeters, and I arbitrarily came up with that measurement just so that I would clear the side of the drawer. I want to make sure I'm far enough inboard so that I don't hit the side of the drawer. So 50 millimeters. I've also set the stops on the fence so that I can just place this drawer front in between the two stops, and it'll bore my hole right in the center of the drawer front. So we're ready to bore. Oh, one last thing I did want to mention. You notice I have this test piece here, and the actual test piece I had, there's about 5 holes in it, and that's because I was adjusting the up and down movement of the head so that I got the correct depth, because these little drawer adjusters you have to be right on with them. You don't want them in too deep, and you don't want them sticking out. So took a little time, set it up, got it adjusted just right. So let's go ahead and bore our drawer front. All right, let's move on to the door. All right, now let's talk about the door. In order to mount the door to the cabinet, we have to mount it to these mounting plates inside the cabinet. And to do that, we need to bore 2 35 millimeter holes in the back of the door with these accompanying holes on each side. We're in luck because the Blum machine cuts all 3 of these holes at once, so that makes it a little bit easier. But our challenge is to figure out exactly where to place the holes so that it fits on the cabinet properly. Now, inside the hole, we're going to mount our hinge, and it just fits in like this. And the reason for these 2 holes is it keeps it square, keeps it from moving side to side, and then just clamp it down. Do this one. Oops. There we go. And then once they're in place, we can clip them right onto the base plate. Just like that. And there's our door. So as I said, the challenge is figuring out where to bore these holes. And I'd like to take you over to the whiteboard and run a couple of calculations so you can see it. It's really not that hard, but we do have to do a little bit of math. I've drawn a model of our cabinet on the whiteboard here, and I just wanted to show you that the red area here indicates our door. And so it sits right here, and what we're going to calculate is where to bore these 35 millimeter cup holes in the back of the door so that they line up with our base plates. Let me show you how this works. The base plate sits here just like this. The center of the base plate is right in the middle of these 32 millimeter holes. So it's 16 millimeters down from this hole and 16 millimeters up from this hole. And the same is true with the hinge. The hinge sits right here, centered on those 2 32 millimeter holes. So calculating the placement of this hole and this hole here is really quite simple. You just have to run a couple of calculations, just a couple of simple addition and subtraction problems. So let's do that. Before we start with the calculations, I want to emphasize one point. We've been very careful along the way here to bore our system holes so that the bottom hole is 44.5 millimeters from the bottom of the cabinet, and the top hole is 44.5 millimeters down from the top of the cabinet. And that was so that we would have a balanced panel so that it could be used either left or right. We also, as you'll recall, set up our door and our drawer front split on one of these hardware holes. But now when it comes to boring these cup holes in the door, the key thing you have to remember is we're always going to measure from the bottom of the door, because this top hinge hole will never be the same distance as this one for a couple of reasons. One, we're inset down here, which has nothing to do with the hole placement, and if you just measure the distance, they're not equal. So we want to make sure that we always go from the bottom of the door, and that way when we get on the Blum machine, we'll put the bottom of the door against the stop and then run to the top of the door. So let's calculate where to place these guys. We know that the bottom of the cabinet is 19 millimeters. And we know from our plan that the gap from the bottom of the cabinet to the top of the bottom of the cabinet to the bottom of the door is going to be 2 millimeters. So if we add that together, we have 21 millimeters. All right, that's what we know there. Let's talk about over here at the base plate. We know that we're 44.5 millimeters to this first hole. I'm going to write it over here so we can see it a little better. And we also know that the distance between our system holes is 32 millimeters. So I'll write this over here. And finally, we know the distance from a system hole to a center line between two system holes would be half the distance of 32 millimeters, which would be 16. So 16 millimeters. So if I add all of this up, I'm at 92.5 millimeters. So that distance from the bottom of the cabinet is 92 millimeters. So now all I have to do is subtract 21 millimeters, the thickness of our bottom and our reveal down here, off of that, and I'll have the distance from the center line of the cup hole to the bottom of the door. So I'll subtract 21, and I end up with 71.5 millimeters. So that will be the setting that we will set our stop to on the Blum MiniPress. All right, now let's calculate the distance from the bottom of the door to the center of this cup hole here. And this is pretty easy because we already know the distance from the bottom of the door to this cup hole. So what we can do is just let's add 16 millimeters here, and then to this one we're going to have 16 millimeters, and then let's just count these spaces: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we know that we have 7 32 millimeter spaces here, and then we have 2 half spaces, which we could actually count as 1. So why don't we use 8? We have 8 32 millimeter spaces here, and 8 times 32 is 256 millimeters. And so what we have just done is we've calculated the center line distance from the center of this cup hole to the center of this cup hole at 256 millimeters. And previously we calculated the distance from the bottom of the door to the center of this cup hole at 71.5 millimeters. So now, to find the total distance from the bottom of the door to the center of this cup hole, we just need to add those two numbers together. I'll run the calculation right here, 71.5, and I'm just going to add those two together. 327.5 millimeters from the bottom of the door to the center of the top cup hole. Right now, we know the distance from the bottom of the door to the center lines of our 35 millimeter cup holes. The one thing we don't know yet is what the distance is from the edge of the door to the center of the cup hole. So I want to show you how to calculate that next. It really depends on the hardware that you're using. In this example that we've been building, I've been using a large built-up plate and a straight hinge. Another way of accomplishing the same thing is to use a smaller base plate and what's called a crank arm hinge, which actually moves the hinge over, and it actually accomplishes the same thing. So here you can clearly see that I have a lower base plate here in terms of this direction, and I have a cranked arm hinge. They've cranked the hinge up. It gives me the same effect as having a straight arm hinge and a taller base plate. So you just need to consult the hardware manual on the particular hinge that you're using to get the boring distance from the edge of the door to the edge of the 35 millimeter cup hole. All right, so after consulting my Blum catalog, I determined that the distance, the boring distance from the edge of the door to the edge of my 35 millimeter cup hole was 3.5 millimeters. So let me draw this on the board. Here's our door, and I'll draw in our cup hole. This distance from the edge to the edge of the door to the edge of the cup is 3.5 millimeters. Now, I know the cup hole has a diameter of 35 millimeters. So half of that is 17.5 millimeters. So this distance from here to here is 17.5. So in order to set the fence up so that the drill bit will bore this hole right on center here, all I need to do is add 17.5 to 3.5 millimeters. And I'm at 21 millimeters. So now what I'm going to do is set the fence up 21 millimeters back from the center line of the drill bit. All right, I've moved over to our other Blum MiniPress, and we keep this one set up for boring doors, boring hinge holes. And so the depth is probably set up, but we're going to run a test piece here in just a moment, and we'll check to make sure that the depth is set up correctly. The other setups that I've done are these. First of all, I've moved the stops to 71.5 millimeters. So I have a stop for doing a right-hand door, and I'll go this way. So I'll bore a hole here, and I'll bore a hole here. Or if I had a right-hand door, you would go here and then move down here and bore this hole. So that's set at 71.5 millimeters. That was our theoretical measurement that we came up with. I've also set the fence forward and backwards so that the distance that we calculated, 21 millimeters from the edge of the door to the center of the hole, will be achieved. So that's set at 21 millimeters. And then the third thing I did was I placed a pin in this shop-built little jig here that has 32 millimeter holes bored in it. The spaces are all 32 millimeters, and this hole is 32 millimeters from the edge of the stop. If you remember, we said that our top hinge was 8 spaces above the bottom hole. So I just counted up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there it is. We actually have it marked on here. So I put the stop in. I'll place the door here, bore, move it down to the pin, and bore again, and we should be right on. So let's bore a test piece, and I really want to emphasize this, that a test piece is essential. Even though we've done all of these calculations, things, don't always set up. You may not read the scales exactly right on here, so you want to do a test piece just to make sure that it works, because once you bore that door, it's a done deal. There's no going back. So let's do a test piece. Make sure you've identified the bottom of the door and whether it has a left or right hand swing. I marked the back of the door with X's to show where the holes will be bored. You can imagine how confusing this would be if you had 30 doors to bore and they all had different swings. All right, let's take our practice door and see how it fits. Get the hinges inserted here. All right, that looks pretty good. I want you to notice that it's a little tighter here and a little wider here, and then here it's tight and here it's wide. That's a good sign. It means that the door is square. We just need to adjust it over, and we can do that in the hinge, and I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. But it looks like we're good side to side. I think everything worked out great. So let's go ahead and bore the 2 holes in the back of our real door. All right, our door is all bored, and we'll insert the hinges and install it, make sure it fits correctly, and then we'll install our drawer front. All right, let's install the door. All right, now you can see we're touching down here, so we're going to have to adjust the door up a little bit, and it needs to be moved over. But all in all, it's a good fit. So I'd like to show you, first of all, how to adjust the door. Our Blum hinges have 3 points of adjustment, and this really comes in handy on inset doors and all Euro cabinets for that matter, because the reveals or the gaps between the doors and drawer fronts are so close. If I insert my screwdriver in this front screw, as I move it clockwise, the door will move to the right. Counterclockwise, we'll move it to the left. This screw in the back moves the door front to back. There I'm moving it forward, and the other way moves it backwards. Then this screw on the base plate, when it's loosened, and then the other screw on the other base plate is loosened, the door will move up and down. There you can see I can move it up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this now. All right, my reveals look nice and uniform now. Just need to do one more thing. With the inset door, and because the hinge is spring-loaded, the door wants to continue on in. If you had an overlay door, it would just stop against the face. So what we're going to do is use these Blum Blue Motion stops, and we'll just take this stop and put it on right over here. Well, that looks great. One final note, make sure that you use the Blum Posi driver on all of your Blum hardware installations. So now let's move on to the installation of our drawer front. All right, first thing I'm going to do is identify the bottom of the drawer, and I made a little B on the back of it here so I know that's the bottom. I'm going to take this strip that I cut on the table saw that's 2 millimeters wide, and I'm going to set it right on top of this door. That'll give me my reveal. And then I'll place our little markers in the holes. Place the drawer front on top of that little spacer piece and then get it adjusted side to side. Remember, I'm still going to be able, once I get it screwed together, I'm still going to be able to adjust it side to side and up and down, but you want it as close as you can initially. And now I'm just going to tap on it. All right, so I've got a little mark right here and a mark here, and that's where I'm going to drill. I've set up a 3/16 inch drill bit in my cordless drill, and because I'm going to be drilling into the drawer, I want to make sure that I don't blow it out in the back. So I'm going to put a little backing piece here and drill it. If you don't put a piece of backing behind your drilling, this is what will happen. You'll get a blowout, and your customer won't be very impressed with that, I can assure you. Now it's time to put our little adjusters in, and the only thing that you can really mess up on this is if you put them in upside down. You want to have the Blum writing up. So I'm just going to put it in the hole, and then just take a hammer and tap it in. And now let's screw it in the drawer. Now these screws are really designed to adjust the drawer front, not to hold it in place forever. So when you put your pulls on, that's going to give you additional holding power. If you're just using a knob, you probably want to put a couple of extra screws in from the back. Now watch, I can just bump this up just lightly, just by pressing up on the bottom. There, that looks more like it. I'm going to tighten it down. All right, that looks really good. I think we'll move on to the next step, which is to bore our holes for the knobs. I'm going to have a knob here in the center and then a knob set down here. And one thing I want to point out is that when you drill your doors and drawer fronts for knobs and you're doing it for a customer, make sure that you've cleared it with them. Either show them your idea or ask them, where do you want these knobs bored? Because everyone has kind of a different take on where that should be. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this for boring, and I'm going to use a real high-tech method of just taking a simple piece of particle board here. It has a nice straight edge on it, and draw a diagonal mark and mark it very lightly. There we go. So there's the center. Now I'm going to pull it out so that I can put my block behind it, and I'll go ahead and drill it out. All right, so now that the drawer front is bored, let's do the door. And I just want to point something out to you, and that is I'm only drilling one door here. And so I'm not going to make a big deal out of marking this out. I'm just going to mark it down and come over and I'll make a mark. But if I was doing a kitchen or a larger job, maybe I had 20, 30 doors that I had to bore, what I would do is make myself a template, and it looks something like this. Just a piece of half-inch plywood with some little pieces on the back, which will butt me up on the door so that I'm always going to be in the same position on a left-hand door, and then I would have another one for a right-hand door. So it would go over here. And that way you can just go through and keep drilling. You don't have to do any measuring. But for this little cabinet, I think what we'll do is, I think I'll go over 1.5 inches, and I'll come down 2 1/4. Right, the last time I'll have to struggle with that. Put my block back here, and now go ahead and drill. One last thing I'll point out to you is that when you buy knobs and cabinet pulls, they'll typically come with 1 1/4 screw, which works just great on a door. Just comes through just enough so that you can just screw it on and cinch it up nicely. But with your drawer, remember, you're going through 3/4 inch of thickness here, and then you have your drawer, which is 1/2 inch. So you need a longer screw. And we used to just keep a bunch of these in our shop just for this purpose. And this one actually may be a little bit long. I'll probably have to get another one. So there we are. Now we're down to our final task, and that's to cut and install the toe kick. All right, the next step, and I might add the last step of the construction of this cabinet, is to install the leveling legs and put on the finished toe kick. So let's get started on that. I'm just going to lay the cabinet down so that I can see the sockets that we put on earlier. This is probably the hardest part of the entire job. The great thing about these leveling legs is that they do just that. By screwing these in and out, you can level the cabinets up. So I'm going to screw them in all the way. Move to the other side here. And it looks like our toe kick is going to be about 4 1/4 inches or 101 millimeters. So let me make a note of that. 101. And now to get the front piece, I think what I'll do is I'll take 2 pieces of material the same thickness as my toe kick, and I'll just measure from outside to outside. And it looks like it's 298 millimeters. I think I'll start out cutting it at 300. I'll get this face piece put on first, and then I'll put on my 2 side pieces. So let me go cut that on the table saw. I've cut 3 pieces of material, cherry material, for my toe kick. Cut this one at 300 millimeters, and then I cut 2 pieces for the sides, which will go here and over there, I've cut them long. And the way I'm going to mark them out is just to simply take it and put it here like this, take my pencil and make a mark. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. Make sure that you put the miter down. All right, and I'll cut those in just a moment. I think what I'll do now is attach this piece to the toe kick. And what I'm going to do is get this thing lined up here roughly where it needs to be. And I'm going to make a mark right here, right in the center of the leg, and I'll make another one over here in the center. Now I'm going to transfer the mark over to the back side of the toe kick. I'm going to center this little mounting bracket on that line. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because this is what's actually going to hold the toe kick to the leg. And now I'm going to go ahead and screw these mounting brackets down. You want to put it roughly in the center here somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, and then I'll put another one over on this side. And I want you to notice that when you put these on, you want the wider flange away from the wood. And that way you can very easily slide on this bracket like so. Just like that. It has to get over that screw. Once it gets in the middle there, it'll slide back and forth. And there's your wiggle room. So if you didn't get this placed exactly right, you can move this back and forth. And so I'll go ahead and place this on the legs. Now we're ready to apply our side pieces, but I need to cut them to length first. So let me go do that and I'll be right back. All right, now I've cut these pieces. I'm going to fit them on here. Make sure they fit and they look pretty darn good. So just like I did on the face, I'll mark them right here at the center line. Transfer the mark. I'm going to mark this right so I don't get confused. Left. Put the brackets on. As you put these screws in, don't put too much torque on at the end because you'll split out this plastic. Makes the little clips harder to put on. All right, let's try this one. This is our left. Let's see how this goes. Now, one thing I want to point out is that I put the bracket on facing up. If you can see that, facing up on the face. And then on the sides, I put the bracket facing down towards on the side of my mark. That way they won't interfere with each other when they clip on here. Okay, there's that one. One more to go. Let's see, I'll put this here. Put it down again towards my mark. Okay. A little fine tuning here. Okay. All right, now typically with kitchen cabinets, you wouldn't miter the corners like this. You'd do a butt cut and you would edge band the end of it. Since this is kind of a small little finished cabinet, almost like a little piece of furniture, I decided to use miters. And probably once we get this all finished and I stand it up, I'll work on these miters, get them perfectly aligned, and I'll put some pin nails in here to hold them together. And there's one last thing that we need to do, and that's to put the shelf in. And I'm just going to pull the door off, put my shelf pins in. I think I'll go right here. These are little 5mm shelf pins. There we go. There's our shelf. Put the door back on. And the cabinet's finished. I've had a great time putting this together, and I hope you enjoy it as well.